the Spanx on.
You'll be fine.
So, with Anglicare, each agency is a little bit different with how they recruit and how they onboard new applicants to become foster carers. We look to onboard about 40 to 60 new families each year. We get families that have had children who have come with them to stay, and then when they turn 18, which is where the system says thank you for all the work that you've done, but no longer is the system wanting to be a part of that child's life. Generally speaking, sometimes to 21, but that's another story. Then the family who has had that child in their care, they don't want that child or young person to then go independent living or go somewhere else. That's their family, they want them to stay. So that then for us is a bed that's no longer available for a foster child or a child within the care system, because that child is now aged out of the care system but will now stay with that family, which we have to do more recruiting, but it is the absolute best possible thing that can happen for that young person, and we're extremely happy for that family to continue that journey with that young person. And that's really helpful if a young person's birth family, for whatever reason, hasn't been part of their ongoing journey, even though they haven't been able to look after them every day. A big part of what Anglicare all agencies really tries to do is to help carers somehow make a connection with the birth family. Now, a lot of times with birth family, there are some big things going on. There are some really big reasons why they can't keep their children safe at home. It doesn't mean they don't love them. It doesn't mean they don't want to be able to provide for their children. It just means they can't. And there are as many reasons as there are people within the system as to why that's the case. So what we'd like to do is to still, whilst we were able to put a child into the system, foster care system, if they have to stay there ongoing because one, their parents can't provide safety, but there's also nobody else in their kin, and that's when we do placement matching, is we look at if the birth family, mum and or dad, can't have that young person at home, can auntie, can uncle, can grandma, can grandpa, who else is in that child's community, so that they go to a family where they can be safe, but they still know that family, so it's not a complete change for them. And this is where cultural placements are so extremely important. So if we have a young child who comes into care from the Uyghur community or even from the Muslim community, then if we have a carer family who are ready from that community who is able to take that child on, we're looking about the day-to-day rituals that go on, we're talking about the language, we're talking about the food, we're talking about the community. If this is familiar to the child, it's such an easier place for that child to start to live in a strange family. Part of that also is maintaining connection with the birth family. Sometimes being a small community, that can be tricky, because perhaps the children that you have, you know the family or you know of the family, so it becomes a little bit tricky in your community circles. But PCP and your support agency will support you to be able to make that as easy as possible in what is a tricky situation, so that that child can still have connection to birth family, but you're able to keep them safe and you safe as well. I was still on the last slide.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So each year, I was going to say, as children age out, also we have families who, for whatever reason, they became foster carers, but now it's not the right thing for them. Maybe as their children were growing, they wanted to and were able to take on more children with their family, but now that their own family has grown, they might not want to do foster caring anymore because they want to get a caravan and go travel in Australia, and there's no room for foster children because they have to go and meet with families, so they can't just take off interstate with them. So, you know, their lifestyle changes and different things happen for them. It may be that they've had a big circumstance happen in their own life that stops them from being in the foster care community. So for as many foster carers as we do recruit, it's never enough. I started in foster care 21 years ago. Yeah. And at that time there was 1,700 children who were within the foster care system in South Australia. The last statistic I checked, and it was going up, it was 4,200. Wow. So significantly we are increasing. I think there's been a few campaigns that have happened. Child protection is everyone's business. I don't know if you've heard of that on the TV. It's an older one from a few years back. and also the Working with Children's check. For you, when you become a foster carer, as you start applying, it'll be everyone over 18 in your home will need to be working with children's check, not just yourself. And also close people in your community. So if you have people who visit your home regularly, they will also need to be working with children's check. If you have other people's homes that you visit regularly and you would expect that a child in your care would visit that home with you, they also need to be working with children's check. Anyone who goes onto a school, I can remember going to my daughter's school, she's 28 now, but when she was little, I didn't have to have a working with children's check. I had one because I was, Anglicare, but you don't, back then I didn't have to have one to be a volunteer in the school. Now you can hardly set foot in the school without having checks, working with children's checks. When we do working with children's checks, it's not just your normal working with children's check that a school might do. We also do what we call a CP check, which is child protection history. So it's a little bit more in depth. That won't be just for you. Am I talking okay? Am I not too fast? Yeah. So it's for everyone in your community. We'll be working with children's check, but also child protection, child history check, to make sure that there's nothing on the system that might frighten us. Part of the process that we go through for foster care is, it's long. Can I just say, you think, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky, but I hope you forgive me, but the amount of phone calls I get in October, November saying, we think that we can do this because we want to give a child a home for Christmas. And we kind of have a little joke in the office about, it's not 1 or 2 months, it's like 9, 10 months, maybe 12 months that you go through a process where we get to know you, you get to know us. We do a lot of training. I think you showed the slide before. There is a lot of mandatory training. That training has to be updated every 3 years, so it's not just done, tick the box, I can get on with my life as a foster carer now. It is ongoing. There are other trainings that are also ongoing, which is more about supporting you. They're called elective, but it's about supporting your journey. So if your little person is having trouble at school, then we have training to help you deal with a young person who's having trouble at school. If your little person is wetting the bed, then we have training about wetting the bed. If your little person is having really big behaviours, and we find that with our young people, and I'm just thinking, imagine somebody comes into your house one day, you've never met them before, there's 2 of them actually, and they show up, they're very official, and they sit down and they say to you, you're going to need to come with us, so we're going to help you pack a bag and you're going to come with us. And the rest of your family are upset and don't know what's happening. They might be crying, they might be yelling, they might be getting a bit aggressive, they might just be rocking in the corner and not quite sure what to do. They've got no answers for you, they can't help you at this time. And so you go and you pack a bag because the people asked you to, and then they take you to a house that you've never been before. And they say, this is your new home. You can call this one mum and you can call this one dad. For you, as an adult who has skills in how to regulate yourself, in how to look after yourself, that understands the world a little bit better, that to me is frightening. I think as a grown-up. So I'm thinking, as a little child, to have all of that going on, what did I do? What have I done that I can't stay with my mum and dad? It's my fault, I've done something. And all of that comes with this little person when they come to your house. So they're going to be upset. If for no other reason than they've been removed from their community and put into your community. Even in the house, I think some people shower at night time or bath at night time, some people shower or bath in the morning. You get a little person who's used to showering in the morning, and then all of a sudden you're saying to them, go in the bath at night time. What is this crazy stuff? I don't bath at night time, I bath in the morning. Brush my teeth before I go to bed? No, I brush them in the morning. So all these things that are normal in your house aren't normal. We all have normal homes, but this little person's normal is probably a little bit different to your normal. And then all of this they need to learn. The culture of what is your home, they need to learn. And there's a strange space, and there's nobody I know who can look after me while I learn. And this is the young person that you get, regardless of what other things might have been happening in their home that cause child protection to step in and say you cannot provide safety, we need to find somewhere else for your child to be at the moment. So this scared, afraid little one is what is coming into your home. And you're going to see them, they can't tell you I'm scared, they can't tell you I'm afraid. They're going to show you. And how they show you is They tell you rude words. They tell you you're not my mum. They don't want to eat breakfast with you, or they don't want a hug or a cuddle, even though in their heart that's all they really, really want. And so we, through our training, will get you prepared for how do I sit in that space. Because as parents, you have rejection from these children. They will not want your love a lot of the time because you're not my mum, because you're not normal to me. I don't understand why I'm here. So that will take time. And depending on where they've come from, if they haven't had the experience of love and nurture in their life, it's been very different. That might be very hard for them to accept. Some of our kids, you go to touch them and it's like hot fire. They have no touch, you can't touch them. So it might just be you start with this, but we work with you so that you understand how to gently work your way into a young person's life. When a young person is distressed, they can have really big behaviour. Part of our process of onboarding and the training that we do is to help you understand that that's coming from their trauma history, that changes how their brain is depending, even from before birth, any amount of time that they've been in a place that's not really been nurturing for them, it's changed how they respond to the world. They're now in a place where they flight, fright or freeze. Have people heard of that when you're in a frightened state? Yeah, so our kids live there, so they're hyper-vigilant all the time on alert, wondering where the next unexpected thing is coming from. Sometimes they will get loud because they want you to get loud, because then they know what's going on. When it's quiet, I'm not used to the quiet. Because when it's quiet, it's the build-up, I'm waiting for the big explosion, because then after the explosion, I know I'm safe for a little bit. And they might try and coax you into their world. That's really hard as a foster carer, to be in that space and be calm. I know, even with your own children who don't necessarily have these backgrounds, sometimes it's really hard to be in that space. So your foster care journey, yes, it's an assessment, but it's also preparing you for what are going to be some big days. Can I say the big days are also, this little man has just tied his shoe, and he's been struggling with that for ages. His tongue might have been sticking out as he did it. But he's got there. So there are beautiful moments. Anglicare has a campaign, Moments That Matter, because there are beautiful moments that you will find as a foster carer. But there will also be challenges. We want to make sure that we can keep you safe while you're keeping little people safe. And that's why the journey that you will go on through your assessment takes 9 months. It's like the pregnancy pause, the 9 months. So that's it. But instead of carrying the baby in your tummy, you're carrying a whole lot of training and assessment for part of that journey. So, if an interpreter is required through that training, then we will do that. None of the training that we put on comes at a cost to applicants. That's the agency puts that training on in preparation. If you are a couple, if you're a single person, lovely. If you're a part of a husband and wife team, your husband must want to also do this journey with you. And you must come to all of the training and all of the assessment together. Sometimes that's a little bit tricky. I know a lot of gentlemen think that looking after the children is the women's job, and then I do the job outside the house. I'm not quite sure how your homes are, but with the foster care journey, it really needs to be, for the assessment process, that you're in it together. We need to know that your partner is as committed as you are to becoming a carer. It's a must. And the reason for that is we need to keep you safe. And if they don't want to do it, we can't keep them. If things go big and they really haven't been involved in the process, then it's going to be a difficult time for them. So we really need families to work together towards becoming carers. If you have older children in your home, we will interview them as part of the process to make sure it's the whole family who becomes foster care family. So we will also interview them to make sure that they're aware of what's going on, that if there's any unanswered questions that they've got that maybe they didn't want to ask mum or dad, because I don't want them to think that I don't want to do this, but so we are happy to ask and answer the tricky questions, be in that space. So it's the whole family. When we place children, Your youngest child will determine the age of the child that we match with you. There is a lot of work that goes into the matching process. So if you're a Muslim family, then we will look for, at best, somebody who comes from a Muslim background. If your youngest child is 8, then we will look to place underneath the age of your youngest child so that your child doesn't feel displaced within their own home. Language is also another thing, so depending on what language you speak at home, we will try to make sure that the child that comes to your home speaks that language as well. And the reason for that is, I want you to be you in your house. I don't want you to have to become someone else in order to support a system. So if English isn't the language you use at home, it's fine. But we need to know what that is so that when we have a child who speaks your mother language, that is your everyday language at home, comes along, we know we have a family who's ready for that, who's prepared and is ready and willing to go. So I think...
Next one.
Yeah, go on. Ooh, foster care is not adoption. There is, and I think I heard you say emergency, respite and long term. Emergency care, you might get a phone call. Emergency happens in a 24-hour space, and I might repeat something that you said. So you might get a phone call in the morning, this child is going to need somewhere to live by this afternoon or by this evening. When a child first comes into care, every attempt is made to get that child back to family. You don't want to be raised in the foster care system, you want to be raised in your own family, your own stuff going on, and get on with life. Being in a system, if we can help it, is not where we want our children to be. So DCP will do every effort to try and support their parents to be able to provide safety at home so that young persons can go home. Sometimes those options become exhausted. There is no one in the extended community of that young person who wants to take on the care of a child. So this is where we come for general foster care, which is then looking at the general community to be able to take on what is a stranger in their home. So normally a child will come in on an investigative order. Once we've had the investigative order, there might be 12 months. Okay, the court has decided, let's give this family 12 months to try and get their training done, to try and get some supports in place, to try and work on what the issues were that were in the way of them providing safety. And sometimes 12 months, and in that time we reunify, which means we support a process of that child being able to go home little bit by little bit until family and young person are ready to move back in together. Sometimes, often it's not that smooth, and so the court will decide on another 12 months. So that's another short-term placement, that might be another 12 months worth. But at some point we need to permanency plan for our little person. We need to be able to say, we've tried, that hasn't been successful. Now while we want you to stay connected to your family, you're going to live here because this is where safety can be provided and assured. That will go on to a long-term order. So you'll then have a child who comes to stay with you until they're 18. Technically, because at any time, parents might have some change of heart, something different might happen. An auntie who had no idea this was going on might come out of Ipswich. And then all of a sudden, we have what was a long-term placement that now has other possible factors involved. It will be taken into account if you've had the child in your care for a long time, that how attached that child is to you and that community that's around that child. But the best place to raise a child is not in the system. So whilst we have long-term, and I'm aware that often when people take on other children, they are in my heart, they're in my home, they are mine. And I will look after them until they don't need me to look after them anymore. Foster care is a little bit different. You also parent in what we call a fishbowl, which is you have a DCP worker who pops in often, you have your placement support worker who pops in often. Because of the history of the child, you also have visits with the parent and the family of the parent. That happens, which is just that in itself is different from what your own child's experience might be. But then on top of that, we might also have having a bit of trouble at school, so we've got some help. They've had a little bit of developmental delay, so we've got them on the SWAT team, so we've got specialists who are coming in to support the child, maybe some counselling. So there's all these other appointments that come along, and then the DCP worker who makes sure that those appointments are happening and happening regularly and going as they should. And just checking, doing a case plan, to make sure that everything has been considered for this young person and we're working towards what's best for them. So there is a lot going on. When you take them into your home and your heart, there is still a big system that works with you, which you will come to love, hate, can I say?
Yes.
There is never enough resources for the needs that you will have. However, there is always somebody you can pick up the phone and call. There is always someone who you can say la 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 la, and they will have expertise, or people just around the office who have expertise who will be able to support you and help you with that, which is very different from what being in a birth family situation is. But yes, working within the system is a real love-hate relationship, so be prepared for that. Sometimes people say the kid's easy, it's the system that makes me crazy. So some people feel that it's once the child is mine on a long-term order, once that happens that they're mine and we can just get on with it. That just be in the back of your mind, yes, but not always. And sometimes other things happen, and that's part of the system that others come into play. I've already said people in your system need to be checked. Lots of training, so prepare yourself. Like the onboarding, I think there's 6 mandatory trainings, which some of it we have online because of COVID. A lot of what we do for training at this very moment is delivered over Zoom or Teams online, so we don't get you to come into the office for meetings. We are hoping that that will change soon so that we can actually have meetings, because the best supports that you will find are in those rooms. Other foster carers who you can just go, "Whoa," and they'll go, "Yeah, mine too." And you can work through some of the strategies that you've used for them or them for you, so that you can look after yourself while you're trying to look after this young person's needs. Like I said, if you need an interpreter along the journey, sometimes a simple conversation is fine. With that more complex stuff, and some of the things we've had is that the words were easy, but the understanding of what the words were trying to tell me might have been a bit tricky. And so at any point, if you feel that support is needed for us to get the message across better, then just ask. That's something that we're more than happy to provide. Or if we feel that you're not quite getting the concept, you hear the words, then we'll also say, look, I think it's time we brought an interpreter in. Single or couple, couples must come along. Our goal is will be to make placement matches with you that suit you as a family. So when you become a foster carer, the match has to be right. So part of your journey into assessment is, what is that match that's right for you? What is the age group? What are the age group of your own children? Would you be happy to have a child who was an Aboriginal child, a First Nations child? Would you be happy to have a child who was an Australian child? Would you be happy to have a child who was, give me a culture? Or are you wanting specific children from who are Muslim children who come from Uyghur community? So that's your conversation with your assessment worker as what you feel is a good fit with your family, and they'll have that conversation with you. Because we need to make it a good match. It's hard enough already unless we put a child in there who just doesn't suit what's going on. And that's, what do you do with your days? How often do you go to work? Does somebody stay home? Are you able to pick children up from school? With the very little ones, we do a lot of reunification. So are you able to drive them to meetings or to family connections? So all of that gets taken into account when we do placement matching. And if that has not scared you away, and you think that foster caring is really something I would like to talk further about, please take a photo of this and keep our phone number.